Two individuals right here in the studio this morning. Mayor Mark Barnett with us. How you doing, sir? And thanks for coming.
Good morning. Doing great. Had a great weekend.
Yeah, you did. And we're going to be chatting a little bit about that, too. Mitch Foster is here as well. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, Chris.
And thanks for coming in. By the way, for our two audiences, you can watch this segment on our Facebook pages. It's streaming right now at WMOM on Facebook, as well as Hot Country Hits Facebook page. Our YouTube channel, we're streaming that there. And over your smart devices like your Amazon Alexa, your Google Home at WMOM.FM and HotCountryHits.com. And, of course, over the two frequencies, 102.7 and 99.9. Over the next few minutes, we'll chat with these two individuals about an update that we want to get every couple of weeks here of the city of Ludington and what's happening out there. And of course, if there's any questions that you have, certainly you can head over to our Facebook page and ask them as we go. There's always a great transparency here in the studio about trying to answer and keep the community educated as much as possible. So we appreciate the two of you coming in. Mitch, anything that you had this past weekend here in Ludington? We'll start there.
Oh, dear. Spent a little bit of time with friends and a little bit of time on the golf course and a little bit of time trying to relax and find some peace as we get towards the latter part of this weekend, this summer. It's been a busy, busy summer.
It has, and just the restaurants have been busy. The Artisan Fair took place this past weekend, and I heard a comment, I think it was yesterday, that it felt like because sports is starting back up at the high school level, school level, that schools are going to be back in session, that we potentially could have seen the last big hurrah for the summer. Is that kind of what you're hearing as well?
Yeah, I think so. You know, what we saw, I think, leading up to this weekend and over the weekend, my wife and I took the kids down to the craft fair as well, and bought a few things and really ended up just buying a bunch of stuff from the Optimus trailer as well, like snow cones.
Yeah.
But it was packed down there. And so I think you're absolutely right, Chris. I think this was probably one of the last big weekends. But the nice thing, what we've seen consistently over the last few years, at least since COVID, is really the idea that people are extending their vacations, you know, especially those that maybe don't have kids. They might be extending their stays here in Ludington. And those with kids are coming back for long weekends kind of after the school gets started. So hopefully that continues.
All right. Mayor Barnett, same kind of questions. I had a chance to see you at the skate competition. That was pretty cool yesterday.
That was very well put together and very well, shameless plug, very well emceed and
thanks.
did a great job. And it was really great to see. I would guesstimate probably 300 people in attendance rung around seated around the entire venue. And the kids were just pumped up. It was great to cheering each other on. It was just a great time and just a wonderful event. And I appreciate the folks from Ludington Police Department and young man that put that on.
Yeah, Adam and Adam Ani and Mike Hebman, Sergeant Hebman from the Ludington Police Department really spearheaded that, and it was good to see. Now, we didn't get a chance, by the way, to mention you and Chief John Henderson from the fire department. The two of you were huge in getting the skate park here in Ludington established, right?
Yeah, we had the opportunity to work with a group of skaters. The old skate park was in the 4th Ward and just in need of repair. So we looked at it and thought, where could we put this that would be sort of a centerpiece? And there was this old sandy lot right next to the mini golf, and between that and the shuffleboard courts. Those of you that have been here a while, you'll remember that lot. And it just, in my mind, it made it a crown jewel for Stearns Park. And anyway, the real stars in that whole effort were the skaters themselves. There's a couple individuals in particular that just really carried the water on that and made it happen and got people to donate. So just appreciate everybody being involved in that financially and otherwise.
That's very cool. And we continued to, with the sesquicentennial this year, back during that time period, prior to that, before it was a sand dune or a sand lot, it was actually a dance club. I found out yesterday.
Yep.
That's crazy to find out. And I think that'd be fun. And I'm sure there's one or two people that come to mind for either of you that would be neat to bring into the studio to talk about the history of, we've got the Historical Society and such, but I think we should probably pursue that and have somebody come in. Mitch, does somebody come to mind for you? you?
I think everybody's first. There are two people that usually typically come to my mind that aren't Rebecca Barringer from the Historical Society, but it's Jim Jensen and it's Dr. Bill Anderson.
Yeah.
Between the two of them, I think they could transcribe or give you a rundown as to every important historical person, location, building, event in Mason County's history. So either one of those gentlemen are very, very well versed.
All right, we'll have to plan on that before the end of the year and such. Speaking of the sesquicentennial, Mr. Mayor, you have headed that up quite a bit this year. Any more activities that we're looking at, or have we kind of gone through most of them, or are you still conversing about some possibilities?
Looking at the Trial of the Century coming up at the White Pine Village, and I won't go into a lot of depth, but there's I know a guy who's going to play a rather I forget the word, but anyway, kind of a bad guy role in that,
Okay.
and minimal lines, so that's a good thing. Just a matter of doing some escaping from law enforcement. So anyway, looking forward to that, and I think that'll be kind of cool.
All right, very, very neat. And looking forward to that. That's is it October? No, September.
Yep.
All right, there we go. So we'll have more information on that. You've got the city meeting tonight. It starts at 6 p.m. Kind of a light agenda for the nighttime tonight. We've got a few things that we want to talk about. But you had a meeting last week, Mitch, in regards to the ARPA funds.
Yeah.
And that was an opportunity to hear from the community for the last remaining. And I think, if I remember right, there was about two to 300,000, or is it
only 122,000.
Okay.
Really, that hasn't been unallocated.
Okay.
Or that hasn't been allocated. So, we had a good meeting. We probably had, I'd say, Mr. Mayor, if you want to remember,
30-ish.
30-ish
Yep,
people.
yep.
It was well attended. Different folks, except for maybe one or two that attended the first one. And they did a really good job of kind of expressing their opinions. We had a couple of folks speak on behalf of some requests, and have, as of right now, we'll bring it to the first meeting in September for council to consider likely. But we've got a good breakdown of where at least their preferences are for the dollars to go.
Yeah, and what were some of those suggestions, if you don't mind?
Yeah, so we had three requests from some community organizations, and two of those community organizations had some dollars that were requested to be allocated to them by the group, and that was the Lakeshore Food Club, and that was the Lakeshore Children's Advocacy Center. And so those two are really high vote getters. Adding basketball courts to the community or building those out. If you notice, if you drive around town now, there are 0 basketball courts other than at Foster School, which will be torn down. There are no other basketball courts within the city of Ludington. After all the elementary schools have been kind of demolished, or the courts over at the middle school, high school have been torn down as well. Yep. And so that was a big request that was actually the second highest vote getter, was to have that accomplished. So, yeah, I mean, we've got those three right off the top. We have some dollars going towards the community center funding assessment. We have some dollars going towards a Love Ludington fund, and then invasive species. So really trying to do a lot of publicly facing projects to really help folks out and to do the best that we can.
And those dollars can be allocated to organizations, not necessarily businesses. I think that you can't really go that direction, but any sort of organizations that are looking to improve the community, beautify the community, sort of that area, right?
Yeah, and so the Love Ludington Fund is a good example. The idea there is we create a revolving loan fund of some sort that can help property owners when they are dealing with issues that they necessarily can't afford. So that we can help them get that project done and help improve the neighborhood.
Okay, very cool. Mr. Mayor, anything to add in regards to that from the meeting last week?
Well, I certainly the funding was there for invasive species. That at least is being the council is being advised to consider that. But the thing tonight with regards to the meeting is Kathy Winchesky's been working with Vicky Sawicki, and she works for a group called SISMA. And it's an acronym. I can't begin to tell you what the acronym stands for, but it's SISMA or SISMA. And she's going to come and give a presentation on invasive species. And I think I think if people came for no other reason than just to become educated a little bit more about invasive species, we'd walk away understanding that Ludington has a pretty severe problem with regards to that, and it can affect property. And so I just invite people to come and be educated and find out some stuff and see whether or not their properties have any of that. It's an important issue.
And when Kathy joined me on the air a little over a week ago, it was very interesting to find out that I think if anybody looks in their backyard or around their home, they're going to find this invasive species, and not just one or two, but multiple ones out there. And one of the interesting things she brought in. And I can't remember what it is now, but it was from the state park, from Cartier Park.
Oriental bittersweet.
There you go. Yep. And it looked like, if somebody was walking through the park, they would think that would just have been something natural for the park. But we find that is attacking the trees and in the environment there, and something has to be done. And it sounds like there is a good effort, Mitch, for us to focus on the parks, but you want the community to focus on their residents, their yards as well, before that spreads into the next door neighbors and so on and so forth.
Exactly. You'll see around the community, Oriental bittersweet's a big one. Tree of Heaven's another big one. These Japanese knotweed is really invasive and damaging. And so the goal with the 10,000, at least in the ARPA funds, is really to hire a group like SISMA that does this. This is what they do: is they come in and they abate invasive species. And so to have them come in and work on properties where maybe there's a cost share with the property owner, because these sorts of invasive species not only damage their property values because, they're dealing with an issue, but also they could damage the house and the homes.
Yep.
They could damage whatever trees and other plants you might have on the property. They might destroy a fence. It's really bad. There are houses in the community right now, if you drive around, that you physically cannot get to their backyard because of how dense the invasive species are. It's pretty terrifying, almost like an old horror film where you'd have to chop your way through, and all of a sudden a plant starts attacking you that thick. So.
And Kathy did mention one home in particular, not location of the home, but just one example of that. Is there a point where the city steps in to assist with clearing that out, or does it completely fall on the homeowner? Budgets are budgets. You got the city budget, and this is something that's been around for a long time, but. Right. But is there a point where you say we need to dip into that to help?
I think there's conversation that council's going to have during the budget season about, maybe creating some sort of a fund similar to how we do sidewalks, which is, as it's identified, it's a 50-50 cost share with the property owner. I had an issue on the property right adjacent to mine, owned by the Educational Service District, West Shore ESD, and I was able to work with them so that that was abated. It was Oriental bittersweet as well. But I think there's ways that we could try to figure out some sort of cost share, because this is a problem that is not, as you noted, Chris, it's not a problem that's just on one property. It's on a lot of properties.
All right. If you're just joining us, we're talking with Mitch Foster, City Manager of Ludington, and Mark Barnett, the Mayor of Ludington, this morning. One question that's come up about the alley behind Sportsman's and Timbers and such, and can you address that? It's blocked off, and we know that that Doc Reamer has purchased the parking lot right there next to the old bank building where the Townie trailer is. But there's been some questions in regards to the alley that spans between Rath and South James Street. Can you kind of address that, if you don't mind?
Yeah, the long-term plan, I think, from the DDA and at least from City Council's perspective, and the mayor's done a ton of work on this, is to try to turn that into really more pedestrian-friendly than it is. We have heard from the property owners that abut it that alley was in the worst shape probably in the city, and so this temporary overlay and sealing that we did, that Public Works did and Reith Riley and other contractors did, is to try to turn it into something that's more usable for right now, at least that quarter portion or third portion. And then after the Andes building is built, work to do something similar for that entire alley so that people can utilize that, pedestrians, bicyclists, and not just vehicles. So something that's a little bit more user-friendly.
And Mr. Mayor, do you see that the blocks there that will remain so that people that it is only a walking pathway / alley, or do you see that's gonna be removed there?
So, in my mind, the alley continues to be dedicated towards a pedestrian mall, sort of an eating area. Whether or not the physical barriers that are there now continue to be utilized, we'd like to do something a little bit more user-friendly, aesthetically pleasing, that kind of thing. Perhaps some planters, something like that. But this is really an effort of how can we capture that real estate, put it to an intended use, at least. Help that to be sort of a developing kind of a how is it going to look when the whole alley is done, and what do we want that whole area to look like. So this is really just an opportunity to capture that particular area and begin use it in that way. And businesses have been really good about working along with us. There's some movement of some tables and stuff that still need to be done, but again, that's going to be a temporary situation as people make suggestions and funding is sought. Because at one point it was I think the price tag, Mitch, don't correct me if I'm wrong, was over north of $1 million.
Yeah. Yep.
And so right now we're probably somewhere around $11,000 for what's been done. Capture that, and then let's begin to imagine what that whole area can look like. So it's really kind of a step in the process rather than a finished product at this point.
And do you see that just kind of remaining the way it is through the rest of the year then? Is that the thought process there, Mitch?
Yeah, I think so, at least. I think it's a really good use of the space. We've already had really good conversations, as the mayor noted, to try to, incentivize timbers and sportsmen's and those businesses to utilize that space. And really, you're trying to prove concept. This is similar to what was done 30 years ago, 25 years ago with North James. Mm-hmm. You close down the street first, you do a little bit, and then you do a little bit more, then a little bit more. I think this is a similar concept, and you try to prove it to folks and prove it so you can spend the dollars or not. So it'll be a really good project long term, I think.
All right. If you're just joining us, we're talking with Mitch Foster, City Manager of Ludington, and Mark Barnett, the Mayor of Ludington. This was posted earlier this morning. We had kind of a conversation on the air about it with the Mason County Road Commission. This obviously the roads, the commission handles the roads in the city of Ludington and outside of it too. But and I'll read it the way they posted it here, and just want to get your take on thoughts in regards to this. And I know DPW does a lot of the work internal on the roads, but I want to see if there's any concern that the residents should have here in the city of Ludington. And here's the notice that the Mason County Road Commission put out this morning. And they said, due to attempts by Eagle and the DNR to prosecute several road commissions for trespassing, poaching, littering ground, and groundwater combinations, the road commission has changed its procedure to pick up of a dead deer and or roadkill effective immediately. They said we're only going to remove dead deer and animals from the roadways, the traveled portion of the road, when they present a hazard to the motoring public. They say we may also move them when they interfere with our maintenance activities, such as plowing or mowing. We will drag them as close to a 90-degree angle as possible to the front slope of the ditch or the back slope if necessary for our maintenance activities. Animals that die and are not hazardous to motorists and do not interfere with maintenance activities will be left there to lie. And they're encouraging people to contact the DNR and Eagle or a state representative. And I know there's been some tension between, especially like when we're talking about wintertime and the chemicals that are put on the roadways and such. But, in regards to dead animals and roadkill and such, does that put a little bit more burden on DPW? Is my first question. And the second question is, and I know this probably needs a little bit more information and investigating, of course, and we'll chat with the Road Commission in regards to this. But could the Department of Public Works or the city be in the same situation where Eagle and the DNR are trying to threaten the city as much as they're doing the Road Commission? Any thoughts in regards to this or any knowledge that you have?
I won't comment on the press release or the release itself. the DPW will continue to remove, dead animals or obstructions in the right of way. We don't have a ton of space that isn't, right of way paved or curb and guttered. North Lakeshore, certain portions of that might be part of that. But we'll continue to do that. I think what you see across the state, and this continues, is that you have certain, and this is just a reality, you have certain political beliefs in different areas. And Eagle has their own political belief, frankly. And they have their own policies and procedures that do not necessarily align with maybe DOT's. And so I think that's part of the issue is you have different priorities and nobody's willing to sit down and just have a conversation about what actually is practical. To tell folks that you can't remove roadkill or dead animals because of an issue with the environmental issues. Senator Darwin Boer, I think it was like 8 years ago, allowed for the removal of roadkill, and you can tag it now here in the state of Michigan to be, I think, processed. So there's weird things going on there, and frankly, you have some state agencies where the vast majority of their employees are still working from home and aren't able to communicate effectively amongst themselves, and so we won't change any of our policies or procedures. I doubt we would ever have a warning or a ticket sent to us because, frankly, you want to have a good relationship with Eagle and the DNR so that, if issues like this do pop up, then you're not having to change your procedures. You just work with them to figure out, well, what's the best alternative or how do we get around this circumstance and prevent it from happening in the future?
Yeah. Mr. Mayor, any thoughts in regards to this as well? And it makes sense. I mean, that there's going to be conflict from time to time, but it's sounding like it's compounding here in multiple seasons, especially.
Yeah, I just think a good rule of thumb is common sense. What helps people out? What makes travel safe? And the city of Ludington's committed to do that. So I would just leave it there.
All right. We're talking with Mayor Mark Barnett and City Manager Mitch Foster this morning. City Council meeting coming up tonight, 6 p.m. You've got some ordinances that are part of the conversation tonight. What do we have on tap in regards to that? Mitch, you want to start there?
Sure, yeah. The ordinance that we have on tap tonight is dealing with kind of what I would refer to as oversized vehicles and storage containers. The city, we approved back several years ago, they approved an ordinance dealing with semi-trucks and the parking of them on city streets. What we found out was it's not just semi-trucks that are obstructions and those sorts of things. It's large box trucks, it's large commercial vehicles, and so this ordinance will essentially say that they cannot be parked on city streets for periods of time, so that we don't have obstructions within the right-of-way that prevent people from seeing around corners, seeing children that might pop up out in front of these cars or these large vehicles, as well as storage containers and those sorts of items. So it's on for a first reading tonight for council to kind of get their understanding of that ordinance out there, but it'll likely have some teeth. I think there's some council members that really want to see this one taken care of because we've heard, especially from members of the first and third wards, that this is kind of a problem in those areas because the houses are a little bit tighter together.
Do you see any can you forecast kind of that time frame that you see that they're able to park on the roadways? Has that been put in the language at all yet?
Yeah, so actually the goal with those, unless they have a special permit, they wouldn't be allowed to park on the street.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
For not only like half an hour,
right.
Not at all.
Well, I mean that idling's one thing, and that's part of that exemption. As we have delivered vehicles or moving trucks, that sort of thing. But in general, it would be not allowed.
Okay. And this is kind of interesting. I was at the Grand a couple of times, and we were, there's a lot of conversations that happen at the Grand, of course.
Oh yeah.
But
like Brenda's.
Yeah, exactly. And so and there was somebody had left a boat on Rath, and it was kind of like a fishing boat, I think it was, and they just left it. Does that happen regularly at all or not?
No, I mean they don't. Unless the mayor knows otherwise, I've not heard of many boats that just get left there, other than they're leaving them there overnight or for a couple of nights.
Yeah, this was for a few days, and I don't know whatever happened to it.
Yeah.
But are people able to, if it's not a motorized vehicle, be able to do that?
At present, it's 72 hours.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. All right, so maybe that's it. It's like, hey, anybody want a free boat? It's right on Raft. Take it. No, I'm just kidding.
I would not do that. No, would not recommend that idea.
No, absolutely, it's insane. What else do we have on the Mr. Mayor? You've got some topics of conversation. Let's go to you for a moment here.
Well, I know there's going to be a request for council to approve application for some burn grant funding. Those are those grants, individual grants, are for things update some equipment, some e-ticket equipment that will allow the officers to generate a traffic citation via computer in their vehicle, and then that information gets transmitted to the department. That type of thing. There's some weapon requests that just to replace outdated, out of data service weapons, and to do that. And then there's some it envisions maybe applying for some equipment to outfit a vehicle as a canine vehicle. Should that program be approved by City Council at a later date, at least to know that the funding's in place. And I believe where the police department sits on that is that council, one of the committees of the council has said, put the numbers together, tell us what it's going to cost, and then we'll decide whether or not to approve it on for consideration by City Council. So they're really trying to, it's more getting your ducks in a row and that kind of thing.
All right, and speaking of the police department, we had the Forward organization with us last week, and the donation of upwards of $7,800 for their forensics to improve that. Mr. Mayor is a former police chief, and that the goal in regards to that is that. And we had a lot of chatter last week about predators and the arrests and such, but knowing the technology that you worked with back in the day versus the technology that we have now, or the technology that could come with these upgrades, I would assume it's going to make it a lot easier to capture these individuals, right?
Yeah. A number of years ago, a gentleman by the name of Steve Marks came and volunteered with the police department to help set up the digital forensics lab. And that really was the ability to view and collect digital evidence in criminal prosecutions, of which these internet crimes are that's a huge component of that. And we talked before about without that you look at somebody knocking somebody over the head and stealing their purse. Well, online now they could virtually do that from the comfort of their own basement, right? Meaning the bad guy. And so that was the idea behind the digital forensics lab. And now this equipment that's being looked at and the money that has been received is really a way to kind of keep pace with what's needed to continue to fight that type of crime. The crime picture has changed dramatically in a lot of respects around the world, around the country, state, and then certainly here in Ludington. So it's important that we continue to have up-to-date equipment and expertise on the part of the people that work in that field here.
All right, looking forward to that, and I think those upgrades needed, since we already are. I mean, that was happened in one day with the local law enforcement. Mitch, before we wrap up, there's been some conversation with the radio station here to revisit Gus Macker, and we've had a pretty credible source here in the area chat with us about this, and a question in regards to this from the city standpoint, and obviously there's probably additional conversations and branches of this trying to keep Gus Macker going. Do you see that the city would support that? And again, I'm not, obviously it would have to go in front of council and the conversations and so on and so forth, but overall, if it was here, or if it was somebody else, or an organization popped up and so on and so forth, could you see Gus Macker continuing supported by the city, and what are the obstacles, if you don't mind visiting that with us today?
Yeah, I can do it. We actually had a conversation with a couple of gentlemen about a month and a half ago, where they were interested and wanted to know a little bit why as to how and why the program kind of stopped, and why Gus Macker is no longer happening, and those sorts of things. And so the reality is Gus Macker, if it's going to be held by a private company, would have to pay for services just like the 3D Triathlon does, for Ragnar, these sorts of organizations that are for-profit entities. When Gus Macker was being put on by the the Chamber of Commerce and the local Macker committee, that's a not-for-profit. They weren't in it for that. But Macker is a franchise-based agreement. And so if it's Macker doing it or if it's a private organization, they're going to have to pay for the public works services, the police services, and all of that. The number right now is about $30,000. On top of that, the Chamber of Commerce, it's over $100,000 a year to host it in expenses. You don't get the full revenue from the Threads tent. You don't get the full revenue on registrations. They truly were breaking even on some years, and you have to have a certain number. I think the city, again, would be more than happy to host an event like that somewhere within the city, whether it is at Stearns Park again or someplace else. I know Manistee is talking about it, and I've had conversations with their city manager who was asked questions about it. But yeah, I think at this point, Mr. McNeil came into a parks committee, had the opportunity to decide to move forward with it as a Macker event, and he decided not to because of logistics or whatever it may be. It's just a tough event to put on for a single organization that needs 400 volunteers to run it.
Do you see, just one additional question, if you don't mind, whenever something has that transition or that break between one organization and another organization, do you see that there would be certain hiccups? You mentioned Stearns Beach. Anything that was grandfathered in, if you don't mind, that might be a challenge?
I don't think so in general. I think the issue that would end up happening is just getting enough people to help run the event. It is so large and takes so much effort and energy between registration, day of, making sure that Macker holds up their end of the bargain, overseeing the food truck area, overseeing Thread. I mean, there's so many logistical items, and then who's going to take that on? Those are all questions that would be interesting to try to answer. But if an organization is interested in putting that on, I think the chamber would be happy to pass along their knowledge as well. And I've got some staff members that have been doing this literally the entire time. But I would say, sometimes events just run their course.
Yeah.
And this might be Macker's time. It might not be. We'll see.
And do you see that with that hole in the schedule, in the summer schedule, that there is that concern? Okay, how much? And I know we asked this question before, but nobody's actually measured the economic impact that Macker had on the area. It sounds like, right? Nobody in all these years, said to the hotels, "Hey, how did you do this year versus last year versus last year?"
Well, but I think that's an easier one to have. I think you'll see hotels will say that they will probably be booked again on Father's Day weekend, but they won't be able to raise the same amount of revenue because they won't be able to charge as much as they have for Macker for 31 years. They can charge a pretty penny for that weekend, whereas they charge a normal rate for the rest of the summer, or their traditional rate. I think what we saw during COVID was Macker actually, that weekend was still busy. I think we're seeing that here in Ludington and in Mason County, that these large events, some of them, yes, they make a huge impact. Others may not, just based on the way that the world is going. And, Macker's seen it Macker-wide in all of their events. They've seen a decline because you've got AAU, AYBT, you've got coaches that are saying kids can't play anymore, and you've got an entire generation of adults that are no longer playing. So it's an interesting transition for them as an organization too, with events like this. So,
but the positive note was that between 2022 and 2023, the numbers of teams went up that year, not by much, but still there was an uptick.
30 teams or so. But again, that's 1 year removed from COVID, so people who may have been uncomfortable in large crowds said that they could show up to that. That's about 120-ish people that were able to attend, or 160. So yeah, it would be interesting to see if someone were to step forward and try to pull that off.
All right, good information there. Anything that we missed before we wrap up this morning? And we appreciate you coming in with this conversation today. You've got the city meeting tonight. It's City Council chambers there, and at 6:00. But anything that we missed talking about this morning?
The other thing I would say is that Heather Tchaikovsky is also just going to give a brief presentation. The city is going through a new website redesign right now. Hopefully, being a little bit more user friendly. So that'll be on for this evening as well.
Okay. All right. Looking forward to it. Mr. Mayor, we appreciate you coming in. Unless you have anything else?
No, I just kind of repeat what we had said before, and just invite people, whether it's virtually or in person, come and get some information about invasive species. I think this is a pretty important topic.
Absolutely. All right, let's make sure that we're there. Because, again, like mentioning earlier, you look in your yard, and you're going to probably find this out there, and not just in the Ludington area, but everywhere out there. It's an issue.
It is in our yard.
Yeah, there you go. I heard that. I think Kathy had said you found it right there.
Yep.
All right, thank you guys for coming in. We appreciate you. It is 9:08. Let's send our country station back to regular programming with news and weather coming your way in just a matter of seconds here on Hot Country Hits 99.9. And 102.7 WMOM will do the same thing. We've got news and weather. Stick around. We'll kick things off with Adele coming up this hour on 102.7. It's Mom FM.
Thanks for making us number one.